Before we begin this video, we need your help to keep the channel active. This is a new channel, and your subscription is extremely important for us to continue bringing incredible stories. Please subscribe, leave a like, and help our project grow. We are counting on you. When the Second World War erupted into full global conflict, the United States Army Air Forces faced the enormous challenge of modernizing and expanding its aviation capabilities with astonishing speed. Among the aircraft rushed into service during this frantic period of experimentation, urgency, and innovation was a machine that today is strangely overlooked despite its importance in early American offensive operations, the A-36 Apache. A dive bomber variant of the P-51 Mustang family, the A-36 was one of the very first Mustangs to truly prove itself in combat. It fought in harsh, unforgiving environments and engaged German forces across several fronts. Yet as soon as the war shifted and newer aircraft matured, the Apache quietly disappeared from the spotlight. But what actually happened to the A-36 Apache after its confrontations with German forces? Why did a plane that earned respect in the Mediterranean, that destroyed fortified positions in Italy, that supported ground troops in some of the harshest campaigns of the war, ultimately vanish so quickly after 1945? Its disappearance is often simplified to "it was replaced," but the real story is far more complex and deeply tied to the evolution of American air doctrine, technological trends, and the shifting realities of a post-war world. To understand the fate of the A-36 after combat against the Germans, we must return to what the aircraft was designed to be. The A-36 was born from necessity. The British needed fighters immediately, and North American aviation offered a design that would eventually become the Mustang lineage. But early production models were not yet the legendary Merlin engine fighters of 1944. Instead, the early Mustangs used the Allison V1710 engine, which lacked high-altitude performance. The Americans realized, however, that this engine still performed beautifully at low altitudes, making it ideal for ground attack missions. So the decision was made: a version of the early Mustang would become a dive bomber. It received reinforced wings, dive brakes, and bomb racks. This was the A-36 Apache. In the Mediterranean theater, the crucible where many American air units first clashed with experienced German forces, the A-36 proved itself far more capable than many expected. Its accuracy in dive bombing, combined with its speed at low altitudes, allowed it to strike German defensive positions with intensity. During the Sicilian and Italian campaigns, the Apache earned a reputation for precision strikes that opened narrow mountain passes, shattered fortified enemy positions, and supported infantry locked in brutal terrain-based warfare. Pilots described a unique relationship with the aircraft. It could be unforgiving if mishandled in dives, yet it rewarded precision and discipline. Ground troops appreciated it because it delivered results. German troops recognized it because it became a persistent threat in contested sectors. The Apache's confrontations with the Luftwaffe varied. While not optimized for dogfighting at high altitude, it was still fast and maneuverable enough to engage German fighters when necessary. Several Apache pilots achieved aerial kills, proving the aircraft should never be underestimated. However, this early success did not guarantee a long future. Even while the A-36 was proving its worth in battle, the technological landscape around it was shifting rapidly. Other aircraft were being developed at a pace that would soon overshadow it. The Merlin engine P-51B and later variants emerged with extraordinary high-altitude performance, becoming true strategic escorts. Dedicated ground attack aircraft like the P-47 Thunderbolt showed tremendous toughness and survivability, and the United States began to restructure its doctrine around these more flexible aircraft. The A-36, by contrast, remained something of a hybrid, an extremely capable dive bomber, but one with no clear long-term niche once newer and more specialized machines arrived. So what became of the Apache when its confrontations with German forces concluded? Its withdrawal from frontline service was not dramatic. There was no catastrophic failure, no scandal, no single moment that doomed the aircraft. Rather, the Apache was quietly phased out as newer aircraft replaced it naturally through the normal cycle of wartime innovation and attrition. Some A-36 units converted to P-40s or P-47s, others received the newer Mustang versions. The A-36 simply faded from the skies of Europe as the war progressed. After the war ended in 1945, the fate of the A-36 became even more obscure. Unlike many famous American aircraft, the Apache did not enjoy a long post-war career. It was not kept in reserve in large numbers. It was not transferred to Allies in mass quantities under Lend-Lease programs after hostilities ceased. There were several reasons for this. First, the airframe, derived from the early Mustang, was no longer competitive in a world where high-performance fighters had advanced dramatically. Second, the dive-bombing doctrine itself was being re-evaluated. The United States, like several major powers, began to abandon dedicated dive bombers in favor of fighter bombers capable of multi-role missions. With jet propulsion emerging and strategic airpower doctrine evolving, an aircraft like the A-36 simply did not fit into the vast reconstruction and modernization of the post-war air forces. Another reason for the Apache's disappearance was that many of the surviving airframes were worn out. They had served in hot climates, flown low-altitude attack missions, endured the stress of repeated dive-bombing runs, and suffered harsh battlefield conditions. Most airframes were simply exhausted by the war's end. Instead of being refurbished, they were scrapped, a common fate for many wartime aircraft, even famous ones. Yet the A-36 did not vanish completely. A few examples were maintained as training aircraft for a time. Others were used for testing. A handful, only a very small number, ended up in civilian hands after the war, purchased as surplus aircraft. But unlike the P-51, which became a beloved air racing machine and post-war military asset for several nations, the Apache never developed a widespread civilian or foreign military presence. Its specialized equipment, such as dive brakes and reinforced structures, made it less appealing for civilian use, and its Allison engine lacked the prestige and performance of later Mustangs. Meanwhile, the A-36's historical identity became overshadowed by the success of its famous descendant, the P-51 Mustang. As the Mustang became a global icon of air superiority and long-range escort missions, the earlier Apache variant was increasingly forgotten. Even historians often compress the story of the Mustang family into a narrative that skipped directly from the early prototypes to the high-altitude Merlin variants, barely acknowledging the Apache's unique combat story. Yet for those who flew it, the Apache remained unforgettable. Veterans described its power in dives, its responsiveness at low altitude, and its ability to deliver bombs with deadly accuracy. They also remembered the risks. Dive bombing against German defenses was one of the most dangerous roles in the air war. Many A-36 pilots did not return home. Those who survived often spoke of the Apache with deep respect, even affection, describing it as a machine that demanded a pilot's full attention but rewarded skill. After the war, as aviation museums began collecting historically significant aircraft, the A-36 became a rarity. Only a tiny number survived scrapping, and fewer still were restored. Today, only a couple of airworthy A-36 Apaches exist, and even these are often mistaken by casual observers for early Mustangs. Their presence at airshows is a reminder of a chapter of aviation history that has not received proper recognition. The legacy of the A-36 is therefore a paradox. It was a combat-proven aircraft that delivered vital results during a critical stage of the war. It shaped the Mustang family's path of development. It performed missions that helped secure Allied advances in Italy and beyond. Yet it was overshadowed by later aircraft that achieved greater fame. It had no post-war renaissance, no rebirth as a civilian icon, no widespread foreign military service. Instead, it faded almost completely into obscurity, remembered mainly by historians, collectors, and passionate aviation enthusiasts. But the story of what happened to the A-36 after fighting the Germans does not end simply with "it was scrapped." The Apache's disappearance is itself a reflection of wartime innovation and post-war transformation. When peace arrived, the world no longer needed a low-altitude dive bomber with early war technology. The A-36 had served its purpose. It had fulfilled its mission. And once that mission was complete, it quietly stepped aside, allowing aviation to move forward. As the years after World War II progressed, the A-36 Apache's absence from global air forces became more conspicuous, especially as many other American aircraft found new life in developing nations. The surplus market was flooded with P-40s, P-51s, B-25s, and a variety of transport aircraft that smaller nations eagerly adopted. The Apache, however, remained nearly invisible in this post-war redistribution. It was not that countries rejected it, rather, it was never offered in meaningful numbers. American planners saw little value in maintaining or exporting a specialized dive bomber that was already overshadowed by newer multi-role designs. As jet propulsion swept across air forces worldwide, propeller-driven attack aircraft began to appear outdated, and those that survived did so because they offered robust performance, easy maintenance, or versatility. The A-36, by contrast, was a machine tailored for a very specific role during a very specific phase of the war. Once that moment passed, its future evaporated. The early post-war years were also a time when the United States focused on rapid demobilization. Factories slowed production, bases reduced their personnel, and aircraft were parked in long rows awaiting disposal. Many A-36s that returned from overseas theaters were deemed not worth refurbishing. Their airframes had undergone tremendous stress during intense dive bombing operations, which placed heavy strain on wings and internal structures. Repairing such aircraft would have been more expensive than building new planes, and with no strategic doctrine calling for a dive bomber fleet, the A-36 had no advocates. It simply became another item on a long list of wartime tools rendered obsolete by peace and rapid technological progress. At the same time, American aviation was undergoing a philosophical transformation. Air power theorists increasingly argued that precision bombing could be achieved with faster, more versatile aircraft, eliminating the need for the kind of steep-angle dive attacks that had once defined tactical ground support. Jet fighters, even first-generation ones like the P-80 Shooting Star, were seen as the vehicles of the future. They promised unprecedented speed, altitude, and survivability, qualities impossible to achieve with older, piston-engine designs. In such an environment, the A-36 offered little compelling reason for retention. It belonged to a rapidly fading world of pre-jet tactical doctrine. Still, the Apache's legacy persisted in subtle ways. For example, the lessons learned from using the aircraft in dive bombing operations later influenced ground attack training and close air support principles. Pilots who trained on or flew the A-36 brought their experience into the post-war Air Force. They carried memories of the dangers of steep dives, flak patterns, and precision targeting. These memories influenced how future aircraft were designed and how new doctrines were shaped. Even if the A-36 itself disappeared, the knowledge gained from its use did not vanish. It flowed into the next generation of American airpower thinking, reinforcing the importance of precision, survivability, and flexibility. Another interesting aspect of the Apache's post-war fate was its place in aviation culture. For decades, historians and enthusiasts focused overwhelmingly on the P-51 Mustang, a natural result of its fame in the European Air War. The A-36, being much rarer and lacking the glamour of long-range bomber escort missions, struggled to find recognition. Only in later decades, when warbird restorations and aviation museums gained popularity, did the A-36 begin to attract more serious attention. Enthusiasts discovered that this aircraft played a crucial role in bridging the gap between early Mustang development and its later success. Without the A-36's combat testing, the Mustang's evolution would have been far slower and less informed. Pilots flying the Apache exposed strengths and weaknesses in the airframe that engineers could refine in later Mustang variants. The few surviving A-36s, then, became prized artifacts. Restoring an Apache was far more difficult than restoring a P-51 because of the scarcity of parts and the unique internal modifications specific to the dive bomber role. Dive brakes, for example, were nearly impossible to source. Even today, only a tiny handful of A-36s exist in operational condition. When one takes to the skies at an airshow, it is more than just a mechanical performance, it is a rare glimpse into a forgotten chapter of wartime innovation. To better understand what happened to the Apache after its combat encounters with German forces, it is also helpful to consider how pilots viewed the aircraft during the final phases of its operational use. As the P-51B and P-51C began arriving in Europe, pilots witnessed firsthand the dramatic improvement offered by the Merlin engine. These aircraft could climb faster, fight at high altitude, and escort bombers deep into enemy territory, roles the A-36 could never fulfill. In effect, the Mustang family evolved beyond the technological constraints that shaped the Apache. Even those who respected the A-36 as a tough and reliable attack aircraft recognized that the Mustang line had grown far beyond its dive bomber roots. However, in the Mediterranean theater, the Apache had already left its mark. The ground campaigns in Sicily, Italy, and southern France benefited greatly from the Apache's accurate strikes. When historians revisit these battles, they often find stories in which the A-36 played a vital supporting role, even if the aircraft rarely receives proper credit. German reports from these campaigns describe the effectiveness of American low-level air attacks, noting that heavy anti-aircraft defenses were often required to counter the relentless strikes. Many of those attacks were carried out by the A-36. Its role in softening defensive lines, disrupting supply routes, and supporting infantry assaults was crucial. These contributions helped shape the momentum of Allied advances. Yet the United States military, always forward-looking, did not preserve the Apache as a symbol of this contribution. The P-47 Thunderbolt became the iconic ground attack aircraft of the European theater, celebrated for its near-indestructible airframe and 8.50 caliber machine guns. The A-36, despite its effectiveness, could not compete with the Thunderbolt's reputation or its long-term adaptability. The P-47 found a place even after the war as a fighter bomber, and it served in several air forces around the world. The Apache simply did not have the same potential for post-war service. When examining what happened to the Apache after its confrontations with German forces, it becomes clear that the aircraft's story is not one of failure, but rather one of being overtaken by rapid progress. It fulfilled a specific need at a specific moment, performing its duties with competence and courage. But once the Mustang evolved and new doctrines emerged, the Apache had no path forward. This was not unique. Many specialized aircraft from the war experienced similar fates. Dive bombers like the German Ju-87 Stuka, for example, were also rendered obsolete by the end of the war. As aircraft grew faster and more heavily armed, the logic behind steep-angle dive attacks declined. Jets would later eliminate the concept entirely in favor of different precision strike technologies. The A-36's disappearance from active service therefore reflects a broader transformation. It symbolizes the transition from early war improvisation to mid-war maturity and finally to post-war revolution. Every aircraft that existed during this period was part of this enormous shift, but the Apache story stands out because it represents the early Mustang lineage at a moment of extraordinary turbulence and innovation. Even though the A-36 did not participate in major post-war conflicts or serve in foreign air forces, its legacy is embedded in the DNA of American aviation history. It demonstrated the versatility of the Mustang airframe. It offered the first real combat data that engineers used to refine later models. It introduced pilots to the handling characteristics of the Mustang under extreme conditions. And it contributed significantly to the Allied push through southern Europe, a campaign often overshadowed in popular memory by events in Western and Eastern Europe. As time moved on and aviation enthusiasts sought to preserve the past, the Apache's status as a rare aircraft increased its historical value. Museums that acquired an A-36 treated it as a unique artifact, a reminder of the transitional phase of U.S. air power. These aircraft, once tools of war, became educational instruments that helped future generations understand how technology evolved under the pressures of global conflict. Restorers who worked on A-36s often described the process as both challenging and rewarding, as the aircraft contained engineering solutions that reflected the urgency and ingenuity of wartime production. For pilots lucky enough to fly a restored A-36 in the modern era, the experience is described as unlike anything else. The aircraft accelerates quickly, dives with authority, and handles precisely, yet it also feels more fragile than later Mustangs. It demands respect. It reminds the pilot that this was not a machine built for comfort or longevity, but for the brutal, immediate requirements of wartime missions. Every rivet, every stress point, and every vibration tells a story. Today, when historians analyze what happened to the A-36 Apache after its confrontations with German forces, they often conclude that its disappearance was not an injustice, but rather an expected outcome of a world undergoing rapid transformation. The Apache served with distinction, completed its mission, and stepped aside as aviation raced forward. The fact that so few examples remain does not diminish its importance, instead, it heightens its significance. The A-36 is a symbol of a moment when the United States was still experimenting, still learning, still shaping the tools that would ultimately secure victory. In the end, the Apache's fate serves as a reminder that not every great aircraft becomes famous. Some fade into obscurity not because they were unworthy, but because history moved too quickly. The A-36 was one such aircraft, respected in battle, forgotten in peace, yet essential in the broader story of American air power. Its legacy lives on not in widespread public memory, but in the details of its contributions, in the lessons it taught, and in the few surviving airframes that still grace museum floors and airshow runways.